Okay, welcome back, everybody. I hope you had time to do all the things you needed to do, eat more food. Um, so what we'll do now is we'll have a Q&A session. We'll start off with a couple of questions that I have for these guys based on the things that they've said. And then we'll open the floor to a couple of questions shortly. There's a microphone over there, so if you do have a question, then just raise your hand and head to the microphone, okay? So I was really interested in the fact that both Shannon and Nanda talked about having the courage to just walk into someone's office and ask for a job. And I said, I don't think I would have the courage to do that. Anyone else has the courage to do that? So I want to kind of understand what drives that sort of behavior, the capacity to walk in and say, hey, give me a job. Get past security some more.
I go first?
Yep.
Well, in my case, I was. If I hadn't learned about Proton's acquisition of Lotus, I wouldn't have come back to Malaysia because I was that focused on working in ride and handling. One of the things about me is by the time I was 20, I knew I could drive better than most people, and I wanted a career that would use that skill. Which is why I chose engineering, mechanical engineering, and majored in automotive engineering. And I wanted to go from Coventry straight into Lotus Ride and Handling because I was reading I've been reading about vehicle dynamics and Lotus Ride and Handling. My dad also had a friend, Harvey Yap. I'm not so sure if you guys know who he was. He was one of Malaysia's most famous racing drivers from the 60s, 70s. And he went from motorsports into vehicle development. So there were other drivers who went from motorsports into vehicle development as well, Sean Ragnotti, quite a lot of guys. And so I saw this as a possible career pathway, and that's what I worked towards. When I found out that Proton had, and it just happened as I graduated, that Proton had bought Lotus, I came back to Malaysia and tried to get into Lotus Ride and Handling. And so that was my objective, that was my goal. I tried several, alternatives, options I tried to get in. It didn't work till finally one method worked, that was it. Walking in.
Yeah, I suppose it's that idea of being fairly single-minded in your pursuit. Like you're very clear in your head, like this is what I want to do. So you went ahead and did it. Shannon, what about you?
I don't know to call it courage. I'm actually a coward by heart.
A nosy one.
Yeah, but a nosy coward. So if I try to find out something, so I wouldn't be putting my life at risk. If I can end up in jail, I'm not going to do it. Basically, I'm not one of those hero journalists you see, behind bars or in the war zone, afraid of bullets. So, but I think for that situation, having made a decision, I want to be a journalist, then one way is to send out applications everywhere and try to convince people to give you a job based on some pieces of paper. And sometimes maybe if you have a nice looking face, they might call you in for the interview. But in this case, I had a personal relationship with at least one editor, so why not try to use it, right? Of course, running through your mind was, what if I knock on the door, say hello and say I want a job, and then they laugh at your face and tell you, no, we were just humoring you as a young boy, letting you write a few articles for us. Don't think you can cut it out full time. That can happen, right? But unless you have an amazing track record, and so put it this way, unless you're Lionel Messi, there's always a chance of you that there is an employer somewhere who doesn't want you, and you just have to deal with rejection, right? As a journalist, in the course of a job, you'll probably ask 10 people to give you an interview, and one will say okay, right? So rejection rate is very high, especially in a place like Malaysia. The moment you say you're a journalist, everyone's like, oh, no, don't talk to me, you know. people tend to be very shy. So I guess because so the other thing you need as a journalist is you have to be very thick-skinned, and you have to learn to take no's for an answer from people, but not from yourself. Like if the first person doesn't want to speak to you, the first person doesn't want to give you a job, that's the process, man. You just got to look for other places. One thing I tell my correspondents all the time is that they come back and say, well, so I contacted this person, but that person doesn't want to talk. And they think that that's the end of the process. It's not, right? Because there's always more than one way to skin a cat. And I think the example is that there's more than one way to be a financial analyst, to get into driving cars for the rest of your life, and to become a journalist. I mean, a lot of my counterparts out there have even law degrees, mass comm, of course, but all sorts of degrees. It's just many, many different ways to get to what you want.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point to make, that there are many ways in which you can, establish a career that perhaps you hadn't even thought about before. So it's not to say that you can't do that engineering degree and then not move on to something else. Rachel, I wanted to ask you about how you dealt with being often the only woman in the room. I think when young women consider studying engineering or pursuing degrees in the sciences, there's this sort of like, we worked with a student who studied physics, a young lady who studied physics, and she said for a lot of her degree, she had this sort of impostor syndrome because she was often the only girl in the room. So how do you deal with that?
I think I definitely felt that as well, imposter syndrome. It's when you feel like you're the only one who's different in the room, you feel like you got a lot to prove, you got more to prove. And obviously, like, I was surrounded by very smart people, straight A students, and they usually have like origin story, like, yeah, I love cars growing up, like, that's why you do mechanical engineering, right? Yeah. And a lot of other things. So I didn't have that origin story, I just, my passion for physics, I discovered it really late, and maybe that was one thing that really, like, I asked myself, why didn't I actually even think of, studying engineering in the first place? It's because I never heard of stories from women engineers. So I think reminding myself of that helps me a bit, because then I would think, like, if I can't find an example of, female engineer in my vicinity or circle of friends, family, maybe I could be that person. So yeah, that helps trying to internalize your motivations.
Okay, yeah, that's great. I think more women should have that sort of way of approaching things. Like if there's no one else doing it, you can be the first person to do it, to be that person in the room. I have one more question for all of you before I open the questions up to the floor. I think all three of you talked about problem solving and troubleshooting as something that you learned as part of your engineering degree. So how do you take that and apply it into your real life now? I know you mentioned a bit, Shannon, about how you do it. So do you want to maybe start?
Yeah, it's practically every day. I mean, that you use this. I wouldn't say it's a skill exclusive to engineering, but it is something that I learned while doing my degree. Is that you look at a problem, not always just a straightforward way. Like, if someone might tell you something, give you a lead, and you need to develop it into a real story with all the actual data and speak to a lot of people. But you can often find that you don't have that direct data. So how do you go about trying to join the dots, right? So one example, maybe it's this recent story I did about the US-China trade war, and how that might have affected Malaysia. Now, I was just looking at this story and trying to figure out, everyone's been affected by it, but how do I tell the Malaysian story of how we've been affected by it, which might be different from elsewhere? Strange thing that's happened during this US-China trade war is that at the same time, stock market has been doing badly since the change of government, right? But there were some bright sparks, and they all were semiconductor companies in Penang, right? So then suddenly having that piece of info, you go like, I can pursue this differently. Let's see why they're doing well. And yes, as it turns out, there was a lot of trade diversion. A lot of clients couldn't make their stuff in China anymore because of the tariffs that were applied. A lot of people were trying to diversify because you live in the world of Trump. Tomorrow, suddenly, he can apply a new tariff. The next day, he can withdraw a sanction. It was very volatile. People wanted to diversify their vendors, networks, and things like that. So this was why Penang was doing well in the midst of it. But where did the data point come from? Data point didn't come from looking at the trade ministry's charts on investments, so on and so forth. That was just one part of it. You got many other data points simply by, at one point, looking at the stock market, which most would feel is unrelated to this issue, right? Looking at other things like how busy has Penang Port been. So you look at the problem and then you try to find which are the ways to get in. It's a bit like a Mission Impossible movie or a heist movie, an Ocean's 11 movie. So you want to steal this diamond, right? But of course, only Nanda can walk in through the front door and beat security. The rest of us will have to put on like crazy Spider-Man suit and you climb up the wall, and then you have a laser cutter, you cut the glass and you get in, and then you have to replace the diamond with an object of the same weight, and so it's like that. That's the job, right? For a journalist, you know what the story is. You kind of know where you want to get with this, but how do you get there? And that's the resourcefulness and the troubleshooting skills that come into play.
Okay, that's great. And Rachel, how do you apply it to mergers and acquisitions?
I think one thing I can think about is, in university, how I really enjoyed sitting down, working through a problem, those late nights studying. And in my day-to-day job, right, we juggle many projects. At one time, I was doing like 5 or 6 projects here and there, and they pick up at different times, so it's very unpredictable. And then, so when all these projects somehow, like the stars align, like, okay, they go busy at the same time, suddenly all 5 deadlines in 1 week or something, I work with different managers as well in different project teams. So we work on a project basis, right? So my manager A will go like, Rachel, can I have this at 5 p.m. Then okay. Manager B will go like, can we have a meeting 12 to 5 p.m. Okay. Manager C will be like, can I have this at 4 p.m. So I'm like, how do I do everything? And just the days are sometimes filled with so much meetings because we meet a lot of people as well. Because being M&A coordinators, you gotta sort of like coordinate everyone, finance, tax, HR, all the teams lah. Basically, you're the coordinator. So you get people coming to you with all the problems and like, can you help me with this? Can you help me with that? So there's a lot of things to deal with at the same, happening everywhere at the same time. So I like to, how there's this open office concept now, like Facebook, Google, everyone's like even here, very open space. And in my company, we also made this transition into a more open space type of thing, less cubicles, less rooms, right? I think the is to encourage communication. But sometimes I feel like I need that time to, just going back to last time in uni, how I had that small space for myself to really figure out a problem. Maybe just a short half an hour, 1 hour, just pure focus, thinking about the problem, no distractions. Maybe, they can wait for later. I feel that I often need to be very intentional to carve out that time for myself. If not, I will never get work done because I'm split in so many places. So I try to schedule my time so that I have those pockets of focus time. So it's a bit tough in that M&A environment because you're always like out there dealing with people. But it's just something I try to carve out lah. Although it's not a conventional thing to do, but yeah, it's because it makes me more productive. So that's one thing that I took from my uni days. Yeah.
Yeah, I recognize that. I know my team probably think that when I'm having a work from home day, I'm messing about and splashing in the swimming pool. I'm not. I too need that time because you feel like you're pulled in all the different directions. I just need a day to be at home and work out all the things that I need to work out without the distractions of phone calls or people needing something, which is a constant if you're in a sort of managerial role. What about you, Nanda? How do you troubleshoot?
See, troubleshooting, or I guess for me, analytical thinking, because it doesn't have to be a problem, it doesn't have to be trouble. It could just be a phenomenon that, that you could understand through a process of elimination, good or bad. I was going to include this in the speech actually. Vehicle dynamics, there are lots of definitions, textbooks, definitions and all that, but the one that I use in my training courses is that it's a cause and effect study of the forces that act on a vehicle, or the relationship between input and response. Inputs can come from both driver and the road. So it's cause and effect, and like I say, it doesn't have to be a problem. So whatever work that I do, if there is a problem, it's the same thing. Elimination process. You understand the phenomenon. Don't project any biases. Be free of dogma. Try and be as objective as possible when you're observing the phenomenon, and then you can go through a process of elimination, trying to figure out what the causes are and all that. Most of the time in my field of work, you'd find that the cause could be one, the symptoms could be many. You could actually try to solve, you can treat it symptomatically, trying to solve many problems, but if you find one cause, which is always balance, you basically solve all the problems. So that's what works for me.
Okay, great.
Sorry, can just add to that point. A lot of what journalism used to be was to tell you what happened, but more often now you are being asked, why did this happen, right? Because when something happens, everyone gets it immediately on your Twitter feed, on your SMS alerts, whatever. So that role is minimized, as it were, for journalists. And now the main thing is to explain why this happened and moving forward, what might happen as a result of this. So it's very much like that process as well, trying to look at what has happened and figure out the causes and what are the effects after that. If this is a coronavirus, for example, I see some of you wearing masks. So why? Well, how did it happen? And people are talking about eating strange, exotic animals. Not sure if that's the actual cause, but people are saying that might be the cause. And what are the effects now? Because of the economic impacts, etc., as you move forward. So yeah, actually quite a similar process.
Okay, great. So I would like to open the floor to questions. Does anyone have any questions?
I have a question for three of you. My question would be, what would be the advice or advices that you would give to your younger self, maybe during college or university? What would that advice be? Thank you.
I start. The only thing I tell my younger self is go cycling. Honestly, I discovered it much later on in life, but I do a lot of cycling. But I was living in the UK. I wish I'd gotten a road bike and gone cycling about
20 years ago.
Yeah, 20 years ago, exactly. That's it. No, because, cycling's basically, for me, it's like, me time. And you're alone with your own thoughts. I discovered flow, which is a psychological phenomenon, through driving. And now I try to achieve that in whatever I do, whether it's cycling or swimming or, whatever it is. So, but riding a bike is very difficult. So that's the only advice
I can't actually ride a bike. It's true.
So that's it, yeah.
For me, I think probably. I mentioned just now that I really like physics, right? So all through my 4 years of university, whenever I had a chance, like when there's optional modules, I'll definitely choose like the advanced technical subjects because I just want to go deeper and deeper and deeper into it. And one time in my final year, just my friend told me, actually, Rachel, I think based on the articles you share on Facebook, right, I feel like you like this course called Visual Culture, Knowledge and Power. So I was like, wow, that sounds powerful. So I signed up for it lah. And then wow, it's like exactly what my friend thought I would like. I remember so this was actually additional module, so I didn't have any sort of academic motivation behind it, no extra credits or anything. It's just like I wanted to do it for fun. And then, so I remember I stayed out all night writing one essay on like, what was it? Something like the gender dynamics in a dance video or something like that, analyzing the what kind of visual signifiers are there, and what it implies, like like the various dynamics lah. So I was like, when I finished the essay, and I keep reading back, I thought, wow, like honestly, if I open myself to like discover like sort of the humanities side of uni, because Imperial College it's like there's no humanities subjects in Imperial College, so that was one of the like rare type of like gems lah that you could take on campus. So I feel like if I knew that earlier, I would have like produce cooler essays lah, and feel like I'm more well-rounded, yeah, rather than just doing math. So yeah, that's one thing of being open to things. Yeah.
Specifically in college, I probably would have told my younger self to date more. Yeah, it was a lot simpler then because you didn't have to take girls out on very expensive dates. You're a college kid, So please don't tell my wife I said that.
Yeah. I have her on speed dial.
Yeah. And this being videoed, right? Oh my god! But I mean, that's just making. Trying to get into what I want to say in a lighthearted way. Try stuff, right? I nearly cussed there, but try stuff. What I didn't talk about my career progression, how I moved. So I started off at NST. I was there for 4 years, and then opportunity came along. There was a new website they were recruiting. It's called the Malaysian Insider. Not sure how many of you have read it. So we are part of the pioneering batch, and I feel it's closed down since. But by the time that I was there, I think we made quite a big splash. Because of that, decision was made at the whim. Okay, let's leave a stable GLC newspaper and go with this startup. My experience there actually helped me win the Shivering Scholarship. That was pretty clear, and then I got that opportunity. So if you sometimes don't jump, yeah, you won't get wet, but it's more fun, when it's wet, right? I mean, more things happen. So take that whichever way you like, but I think just like Rachel's experience, try stuff, right? Even if it seems like off your beaten track, I don't really see how this is valuable for my career. How could I gain from this? Just try it. Try cycling.
Is that aimed at
Highly
me?
recommended.
The one who can't ride a bike. But yeah, I remember when I met Shannon, someone said to me, "Oh, that's Shannon Teo from the Malaysian Insider." That's how he got famous. But yeah, I think I would echo that. Generally in life, if you don't try something, you just don't know, right? Kate, you had a question.
I've got two questions really. So I'm a teacher, and having worked in the UK for years and years, coming to Malaysia, it feels like the students are obsessed about, like you say, certain careers and getting amazing grades. Obviously, we all want amazing grades, but firstly, to what extent are amazing grades important to you if you're recruiting? And secondly, do you, when you're recruiting, I don't know if you are in charge of that, to what extent do you do it blind? There are certain qualities in kids like Asperger's kids, autistic kids, that in the UK now they're actively trying to recruit in some sectors. Does that apply yet for you, that you're looking for students who might be, who are on the spectrum on some level, and therefore will do a really good job at checking or being meticulous about things? So to what extent are the grades important? And then when you're recruiting, do you take those things into account? Does that make sense? Great wording. Sorry.
Yeah. Who wants
Do you want to go?
I'm in a kind of a middle management position, so I guess my team isn't large, so I only get a say in 3 headcount under myself, right? And I'm sure HR back in headquarters has its own process or whatever. I can't remember your first question now already.
Do grades matter?
Do grades matter, right? But of course, I was going to address the second thing, which is actually very interesting. I mean, in my field, what the reporter does can reflect very much on the organization. You're out there. Yes, most of the time you're behind the camera, but the moment something happens, the camera can turn very quickly. I actually think my team, all of us, are a bit weird at it. I can be pretty obsessive compulsive about certain things. But would we hire someone who is a bit on the spectrum? I suppose it depends how much. I mean, we meet all sorts of reporters out there. Some of them are clearly need medication, which is pretty damn I'm not even a jokey thing, but they do get hired, and I suppose because they have particular skills that the rest of us don't, right? And they're pretty meticulous about certain things as well. So in my field, at least, you can be hired for particular types of coverage or even particular roles. One thing that has kind of disappeared from the media industry that I wish we still had was a really strong fact-checking team. We don't really have budgets for that anymore. The reporter is expected to know everything. Well, it's not. I would like to think that at least you can use facts to say whatever you want. That's how I play with facts. Other people might have a different relationship with facts. And so when I get out there and I'm writing my story, yes, Google is a big help, but I rely on Google and Wikipedia, which is a very dangerous way to operate. So I don't know if in future this could change, and people who enjoy the work of quality control, as it were. Coming to the question on grades, I've actually personally never hired on grades, but I've never hired a fresh graduate ever before either. So I'm not really in a position to say. I don't know if I was in a position where I could hire fresh graduates, if I was in charge of a bigger team and there were different strata of levels of hiring, how I would think about grades. But at this point, I only hire people with experience. And I will say that in the media industry, once you're past 2 or 3 years, we already kind of know what level you're operating at, and I'm hiring based on your track record, not what you did in school anymore.
So I think maybe I'll address more of the first question because I'm not in a position where I'm recruiter, senior enough to be in that position. But I think just speaking from personal experience, what my bosses always tell me, attitude is all that matters really. I mean, if you want someone with good grades, you can find a lot of people, basically. And when they interview people, they actually look for, like how they communicate, how excited they are to learn. Because the last thing you want is to hire someone, and speaking personally, I also don't want to work with a fellow colleague who's uncooperative or maybe arrogant, even though that person has good grades. So good grades really isn't anything. It's just looks good on paper, and it's like gets you the ticket to like maybe, okay, next stage. But then really it's the attitude that brings you far in life actually. So yeah, that's my point out it.
Grades important, I guess. Well, yes and no. I guess grades, your degree, it's important because it opens the door, but it doesn't get the job done, and you get the job done. So that's why I guess grades are important. Just second question about neurodivergence. I think I don't hire anyone because I'm a hired gun myself. But I think the industry is changing. I think hiring processes are changing. It doesn't matter where, all over the world, I think it's changing. And neurodivergence is being, the work environment is more inclusive. And interestingly, I was conducting this training session, vehicle dynamics training session, and one of the guys asked me a question. He said, how are you able to collect so much information about the car in such a short drive? Okay, one thing is experience, but I wanted to explain how the physics or the physiology behind it. And I pointed to a tree and I asked her, what do you see? They said, we see a tree. And I said, okay, but if all you see is the word tree, then you're not getting the whole picture. And that's what clicked in my head. I'm a visual thinker, which kind of explained why I didn't do very well in school in some of the other subjects. So in some ways, this is a form of neurodivergence, but at the end of the day, it's a difference that I have made my strength. And I think, the same thing applies to anyone else out there who's different, who's trying to make something, use your difference, make it a strength.
Yeah, I think, in the work that I do, obviously we work very closely with students who are thinking about which university to apply to, what course should I apply for. And fundamentally, it's not, and we keep drumming this in over and over again, it's not about necessarily going to the best university, because that kind of doesn't exist in many ways. It's about finding the right fit for you. So, we meet lots of students who want to apply for engineering who'll say, oh, I must go to Imperial College. And then we get some students who do go to Imperial College and then come back and say, oh, actually, maybe I'm not sure that was the right place for me, because people only think about, they look at the rankings or they look at the grades. They don't think about the fact that Imperial College is in the center of London. Now, if you're a small town girl like me, that can be quite overwhelming at 18. Some people cope with it really well. Other people prefer to go to a university that's out of town, maybe a campus. So it's worthwhile when you're thinking about your options, not just to think about, oh, I looked at this league table and this university is number one for whatever. Because at the end of the day, when I'm hiring, I'm not looking necessarily at oh, did so-and-so get a first class from such and such university? What you said is right. That might get you through the door, but if during the interview you're unable to demonstrate the sort of personality type that I'm looking for, which is really that ability to learn, a willingness to learn, to try new things, then it's unlikely that, I would hire you. So it's those things that do matter. So you're right. Yeah. Anyone else? Any other questions? Please go ahead.
Hi, I have a question for Rachel. So you mentioned that when you first got your M&A job, right, you had no experience, you didn't know what it was about. So how did you adapt to a job that was completely out of the field that you studied? And did your engineering degree help you in that job?
Okay. The second question is easier to answer. I'm gonna say mostly no. It brings. The subconscious part of the emotional and mental resilience, maybe that helped. But then honestly, there's no application at all. To what I studied really. But I think more of the first question. So when I first got into my job, where do I even start? I remember bringing my SPM accounting book to office. I had to dust out the dust because I was like, almost 8 years ago, the last time I ever looked at financial statements was, at SPM. So I think it's a lot of learning on the job and being realistic about how fast you can learn, honestly, because 4 years of being, thinking of numbers in terms of forces and stress and speed and acceleration, all that stuff, suddenly you're dealing with currency. It takes quite a while to switch. And I think another thing is having a work environment that understands that, people who understand that, your colleagues, is actually really helpful for me. So my boss, actually, one of my managers, he used to be an engineer himself, so it's good that he understands, what I'm feeling. I think another thing is also to have a support system. I think, sometimes it can be tough when you're trying to make sense of it all in your brain. Why am I doing this? Why is it so different? It helps to just talk to people who's been in the same position. Because if you reach out, there's definitely someone who experienced that. Even if you don't have anyone experiencing that, I don't know, I find that just taking time off, reading books, walking around, I don't know, museums or whatever, just taking a time, mind off your predicament and really looking at the big picture, it helps me ground myself. Yeah, I think that's the kind of stuff that helps.
I just have a little point to add to that. I feel that also having the ability to say that you don't know is quite important in a situation where you're thrust into something that you genuinely don't know the answer to it. I find it's better to just like put your hand up and say, I don't know. Yeah. Anyone else? Any other questions? If we don't have, oh, go ahead. I have to say, the engineers are asking lots more questions than the lawyers did the last time we had this.
That's weird.
Hello. Okay. So I want to ask, right? So throughout our life journey, we face a lot of hardships and stuff. And there'll be times where like we face obstacles, we fail, and there will be times where we doubt, like, have I made a wrong decision? So how do you go about that and convince yourself, or either like try and like get over it? Like, how would you give us any advice on that?
You own it.
Like, for example, maybe for us, like students at this stage, if we fail our exams, or if we like didn't meet our parents' expectations and stuff like that. Yeah. So how do you go about? Maybe like at a personal level, or maybe at your level. Yeah.
Who wants to take that?
Well, for me, I've always used the forget about what everyone else wants for you. You got to think about what you want for yourself, what's important for you, what you need. You've got to consider all these things first. You know. Cultural norms and trying to be someone that you're not, that somehow doesn't work. It never has for me. And I learned this at a very young age, so sort of did what I wanted to do, and I guess I have a thick skull. so, so I've always been single-minded about what I wanted to do. So things sometimes get really hard. It's difficult. It's okay to take a break. That's what I do. I take a break. I go on a long ride, or just some time to myself, think about it, come back and continue. That's my way.
Rachel?
I think I want to add on to that point. I feel like the self-awareness really helps. Like if you Google or YouTube like TED Talks, right, there's so many of them that say that how narrative is important, right? What the type of story you tell about your own life, your own struggles, is actually helps you a lot to frame things, I personally, when I have a tough time at work in the KLCC, what I do is I just take a lunch break, completely no work. I go to Kinokuniya and I just walk around. Like, honestly, it's sometimes you get stuck in your head, especially if you're dealing with very like regrets, life regrets and all that, and tough hardship. It's something that really eats in your mind, like just there. But I feel like just being aware of like the fact that so many stories out there, like just walking around all the bookshelves, I'll be like, yeah, I'm sure there's like a book in here that talks about my problems, or or talks about how to solve them. Maybe I don't know, like, so that helps me sort of it gives me like hope and also the sense of feeling less alone. So things like reading books, watching TV shows, or sometimes it may help actually to really just, it's the narrative that you tell yourself, like, okay, I will get over this, and I'm not stuck as I want to believe. I'm not as stuck as I am, kind of thing. So that helps.
Hate to break it to you, but you're going to fail and be disappointed in yourself many more times by the time you die. And
That's nice and dramatic.
yeah, just wanted to get it out there. Disclaimer. I mean, I've struggled with self-doubt, loss of confidence a lot. Like I said, I came into this thinking I could write, and realized actually no, that's not my big strength. So I faced a lot of periods where I just didn't think my writing was any good, right? But I think one thing to get your mind around it, as Nanda was saying, that you are your own person. Don't let anyone set the expectations for you. I would say go even more extreme than that. Set your expectations for yourself higher than anyone else's. But expect yourself not to reach those goals. You know, if you shoot for the moon and you only reach the top of the mountain, that's fine, right? That's great. So I don't advocate people setting manageable and realistic goals for themselves. It can get too easy, and then imagine not meeting the realistic, and right? And it might not even be your fault. It can be circumstances, right? Some things are out of your control. But if you know, I used Lionel Messi as an example before. If you wanted to be a professional footballer, be Lionel Messi. And then if you don't become Lionel Messi, I think that's still okay, right? If you're only Muhammad Salah or something like that, I think that's still pretty good. What do you guys think? Not bad, right? So I mean that's how I've operated in my career. I've very kiasu, very competitive. I want to be the best reporter in the newsroom. I probably never have been and probably never will be. But you know, then every time you do something good, you think that that's one step towards that goal. But that goal is always going to be very far away. And so that's how you keep motivating yourself. And then when you do have a setback, but the point is get back on the wagon and go for that next win, right? But yeah, you are going to be very disappointed in yourself many times before your time is done. But don't let that get you down.
Yeah, my motto in the office is anyone going to die? Nobody's going to die, right? So it's fine. Just chill. You know? I just think.
Well, that's because you're not a civil engineer, and then
Also true. I always say to people, we're not saving lives, we're not cardiologists or building bridges. But yeah, I mean, I think I sort of resonate with everything that all three of them have said. I think sometimes when you're 18, you have this vision of what your life is going to be like, and it's never like what you imagined. It's very rare. I mean, I meet people that I went to primary school or secondary school with, and we look at how our lives have panned out, and there's elements of it that certainly I would have expected, but there are plenty of things that are completely different. Like I definitely didn't think that this is what I would be doing with my life. I don't know. I was definitely not very single-minded about it. I was like, okay lah, study law. Okay lah, don't want, like you, I was in my second year, I was like, definitely don't want to be a lawyer. Not gonna happen. And then what? You know, then what do you do? You've studied something and then you don't know what to do next. And mostly in life, you just sort of fall into things, don't you? If you're not single-minded, if you're not Ananda, you're like, I want that job. I'm going to get it. If you're like me and you're like, okay lah, can lah.
I think a lot of where you end up in life, not even at the end, but in the middle, I think we are pretty much, a lot of us here are mid-career. A lot of it is accidental. A lot of things happen to you.
Yes.
Rather than you making things happen. Right?
Yeah.
And the point is, how do you react to that? How do you make the most of it? Life is like a game of dodgeball in that sense, right? Things going to come at you, sometimes pretty quickly, sometimes it hurts, right? But you minimize the damage and try to score as many points as you can.
Yeah. Okay, great. Anyone else? Any other questions? Oh, yes, we have one more. Are there any students who want to ask questions? No?
First of all, I'd like to thank you for the time. I think this is excellent sharing to let all of us know about the reality of being an engineer coming to a career path. As a mother, I really benefit. I say thank you for organizing it as well as your time. I'd like to address two questions. One is actually to Rachel. I recall that you shared that you actually got a scholarship, and that's why you're bonding, so you come to Petronas with this job. If you don't have a scholarship and you don't need to serve the bond, will you be in this job or will you be doing the engineering job? And the second question is for you and Shannon as well, that you're not doing what you like being an engineer, but is it studying engineering help you to develop your strength being different and being able to manage your task. For example, you're being an excellent journalist and able to create the point, join all the thoughts, get the facts. It's because you're not studying communication. The engineering drive in you, the DNA in you, help you to actually be creative. And it helps all the students, even they study engineer, and but doing other things will help them. And for you, for merging and acquisitions, it's also help you to manage different things. So these are two questions I'd like to hear from both of you. Thank you so much for sharing as well.
You got two questions, you go first.
Okay. First question. Okay, I'm going to be honest and say that I definitely didn't expect to do merger and acquisitions. So if I did not have the bond, I'll probably be somewhere else, honestly. But, you know, I did, like, I'm really grateful to Petronas for the scholarship because studying at Imperial, staying in London is a huge financial burden, actually. If, honestly, like, either my parents would be, like, paying for it through their EPF, I don't know, but or I would have to take up a student debt or something, which is really, yeah. I think the bottom line is I was quite happy to serve my bond, and I know that in such a large organization, I think we have like around 50,000 people around the world. I don't know, but it's a huge group. There's a lot of things that I can do within a group. So I was already sort of expecting that I would be doing like. There's a lot of possibilities lah. So although we graduate, a lot of scholars graduate in very typical like subjects, right? But at the end of the day, a lot of us also do different things. So and I think it's true there that we actually learn to adapt and you know change our like be more like better in terms of handling things and thinking. So that's the long answer to a short question. But because as I mentioned, I was gearing up to be an engineer really, like that's my 4 years. Yeah. So at university. So I think to tie on to that question, how I applied my sort of unique time experience. As I mentioned, it's actually not a direct link lah. I couldn't find. Obviously, I was studying a lot of theory, doing a lot of math, doing the creative part of it was more like designing things. But the core of it, right, studying for engineering degree in Imperial College is very direct, like there's a lot of studying. There's a lot of working through the math. There's a lot of like that whole like working through a problem, you know, for example, working through a stress analysis simulation on your computer or something. It requires a lot of focus and resilience lah, which is something I probably that's the transferable part lah. So I would say it's more in the soft skill part of it. The mental strength side that I really can use lah currently, yeah.
That's why, as I mentioned earlier, that if you take a group of journalists and you ask them what they studied, not all of them would have done communication. Some did law. A minority like myself did engineering. Some even did come from accounts background, all sorts lah, right? I think what we shared in common, those who weren't comms backgrounds, that we were trying to run away from our profession. But you can't always run away from your profession. Some things stick, right? Like, so I spent quite a lot of time talking about how the problem solving, the troubleshooting ideas stick with you. But it's also beyond just that whole mentality, the kind of attitudes that you bring towards a particular problem that you face at work. I think an engineering degree is not the only one that gives you this. I think if you end up doing medicine, there's also a lot about this is the symptom, so now we got to figure out the cause, right? So it's not the only one. There are other fields which are like that. But specifically in engineering, the things which directly now I can use at work, well, because I did electronics and majoring in telecommunications, we did a course on coding and algorithm. And it might seem like a very far stretch from journalism, but actually it helps me think through the process of how this story is going to start from this idea in my head, or because someone told me something or I read something, into this end final product which makes sense to the reader. There is also the math. I hated the math, but it's also very useful for journalists. I mean, there's one level where you can accept whatever numbers are being thrown at you by whichever minister. And there's a level where you sit there and go like, wait a minute, this doesn't make sense. I was sitting in a presentation once by another journalist and it was about freedom of speech. But there was a little seminar in Parliament. I was invited by the parliamentarians to sit in. And this other journalist who was giving a presentation said that, it's very important that yes, we want to have people have freedom of speech, but all this fake news stuff, is very dangerous because a study shows Malaysians on average spend 14 hours on social media. You don't need to be an engineer to kind of go like, that doesn't sound right. Right? But still, that you get that trigger because if this was actually true, this is very problematic, right? And clearly there might be a story in this. So you go and look it up, right? And then you find that that other reporter misquoted the study. It was Malaysians spend 14 hours with their electronic devices, which is different. 14 hours is not all on social media. It can be while you're doing work, so on and so forth. And electronic devices, what does that mean? It doesn't just mean handphone. It doesn't just mean computer. It means TV as well. It means the radio in your car, right? So then that's where you get the 14 hours. So part of it was the engineering training you get is that if it doesn't make sense, then it probably is nonsense, right? The entire narrative has to make sense. And that's also how in engineering, when we were presented with problems, the way you find a solution has to make sense. You can't just present it with a problem and then what is the solution? Oh, we are going to nuke it. I don't know. Like you can't just come out with an answer like that. And similarly, when my stories go out in the newspaper or online with my byline, with my name on it, guess who carries the can? It's not my editor. My editor's name is not on the story. It's not anyone else who worked at it coming. It's got my name on it, and you have to own it. And I think in engineering, in some automotive engineering, I believe Bentley, the engineer who signs off on that engine in that particular Bentley, he actually signed his signatures on the engine. He says this engine works, and I guarantee that it's a good engine. The same way in journalism, I engineered that story. My name goes on the story. If it's anything about it is wrong, misleading, it falls on me. So you have to have that kind of ethical link to the final product as well.
Okay, thank you very much. It's well past 8 o'clock now, guys, which bodes well for how good this session has been. Thank you.
Way past my bedtime.
Yeah, and it's way past my bedtime. Thank you all so much for coming to our third edition of Out of the Box. I am genuinely amazed by how many questions the engineers asked today, or the potential engineers. I'm not kidding. If you go and watch the video from the last Out of the Box, the lawyers were all silent, which, as someone who went to law school, I can tell you that it's very, very unusual. Lawyers like to talk, can you tell? Okay, so we'll all be here for a couple of minutes if you want to come and ask us any questions. I believe, Jennifer, is there still food over there? Yeah, so if you want to have some more food, please help yourself. But once again, thank you. Thank you to our speakers. Thank you for coming and sharing your insights today. And yeah, keep in touch. Thanks very much.